Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better. Many spiritual devotees try to make their lives prayers. What does that really mean? What should we think of it? As noted in the previous video, Meister Eckhart recognizes that human beings have a dual nature. Quote, "We possess in ourselves two natures, one that is body and the other spirit." From Meister Eckhart, Selected Writings. There's no issue about the claim that we are bodily. However, there is an issue about the claim that we are also spiritual. Metaphysical materialists try to reduce everything to matter. The fatal objection to their position is consciousness. How could brute matter be conscious? I understand why they want such a reduction. However, frankly, I've always myself found it unintelligible. In my writings, such as Mastery in 7 Steps, I've always distinguished two kinds of values, namely success in the bodily domain and mastery in the spiritual domain. The problem with their only accepting success as value is that it precludes lastingly living well or experiencing sustained happiness. Success can be achieved, but it's always precarious. There are lots of successful, unhappy people. It's true that a certain amount of success is necessary. For example, we need clean air and water, sufficient food, health, shelter from inclement weather, and protection from predatory animals and humans in order to survive. Such economic necessities are important, but usually they're most important when they're absent. By themselves, they are insufficient for lasting fulfillment, satisfaction, or happiness. Bodily endeavor is oriented towards specific content, such as money-making. Such goals are apparent, linear, and superficial. Spiritual endeavor is oriented towards greater context. Such goals are not readily apparent, nonlinear, and essential for living well or wisely. The greatest spiritual endeavor is aimed at enlightenment via non-duality. It's a way of life, whose goal is alignment with being, allness, nirvana, God, presence, divinity, ultimate reality, unity, essence, truth, and so on. Being is formless and unlimited. So it's unsurprising that the emergence of being in our lives requires a transcendence of limitation. That transcendence requires, quote, the intentional subordination of the personal will to divine will, end quote. From Discovery of the Presence of God by David R. Hawkins, MD, PhD. That requires emptying the mind of its usual contents. What's the cash value of that? What does it mean in practice? The best spiritual practices are the simplest and can be carried out throughout the day's activities. That's what it means to make prayer a way of life. By way of contrast, it's not about relegating spiritual practices of prayer or meditation just to certain temporary formal practice periods. Such periods can be extremely helpful, but they're not ends in themselves. The starting point is simply to observe the procession of all one's mental and physical activities without interference, evaluation, or comment. The critical question is, what is watching the procession? Although there are different ways to ask this question, it's the constant asking of it that is leading the spiritual way of life. What is doing this? What is acting? What is thinking? What is talking? What is perceiving? What is feeling? Of course, these and similar questions are all verbal questions, but genuine searching, puzzling, wondering doesn't require using language. Continuous spiritual work is like an inquiring attitude in which every mental or physical act, quote, is sanctified by its surrender as an act of service or worship. When one's attitude towards everything becomes a devotion, divinity reveals itself, end quote. Once divinity reveals itself, one's attitude becomes a lasting one of humility, thankfulness, gratitude, and adoration. Getting there requires the dissolution of ego delusion. Ego delusion is simply identification with the ego. the ego I, the self, the egoic mind, personhood. Although significant jumps in levels of consciousness can occur, intense, prolonged, continuous spiritual work is almost always required for sagehood. It's helpful to quantify this by using Dr. Hawkins' scale of consciousness. In the Emotional Empowerment playlist, I explain that scale, as well as how to do energy testing to use it yourself. It's a scale from 1 to 1,000 of the levels of human consciousness. Any person or teaching that calibrates below 200 should be ignored because it's life-denying in the sense that it's false or without integrity or stimulates suffering. On the other hand, any person or teaching that calibrates at 500 or higher is life-affirming in the sense that it's loving. Sages calibrate at 600 or higher, and their teachings are the best. For example, the calibration of the eye of the eye, which I'm quoting from in this video, is 950. I myself am not a sage. With practice, quote, identifying the watcher then leads into the witness, which in turn leads to the awareness of the experiencer that these are qualities of consciousness, end quote. From Dr. Hawkins' The Eye of the Eye. Although it's not necessary to become a monk or a nun in order to live a spiritual life, you may now have a better idea of why people join monasteries or nunneries. Sages live in abiding, joyful awareness of the total, complete, capital S, self. Mastery of a spiritual practice requires letting go of all thoughts, beliefs, emotions, perceptions, and similar mental contents in favor of thoughtless awareness. The more we do that, the better we live. My hope is that the videos on this channel will assist you in doing that. Peace.